Welcome to the Small Triumph Sports Library and Archives channel. Unfortunately, this is one of those episodes where I have to talk about how dense I can be.
Sounds like all of them, man.
Shut up! It's enough from the peanut gallery. What is it with people and their ability to perceive clear patterns? Anyway, welcome. This is part 2 of my GT6 project summer work update. Roll the intro. All right, so this is part 2 of my GT6 project summer work update. This one focusing on the engine. I was recently watching a short episode of the Round Tail Restoration channel, and in that episode, Chris Fisher was talking about, he was talking about something very specific and unfortunate that happened to him when he was working on his TR4 restoration project. But extrapolating from that, he was discussing in general how when you take on a project of the magnitude of restoring a car, from time to time, you will often end up paying a stupid tax. And this is a concept that's talked about in a variety of different ways. And most commonly, when people talk about a stupid tax, it generally involves having to spend extra money because you bought a new part and you broke it trying to install it, or you had a perfectly good used part and you broke it trying to reinstall it, or something like that. I actually think about the stupid tax more broadly as anytime you do anything stupid that ends up costing you money, time, effort. You might even injure yourself from doing something stupid, which can cost you all of the above. And usually it's some combination of time, effort, and money. But a stupid tax is a price that you pay for doing something stupid. Could be that you get in a hurry and you try to do something quickly and end up breaking a part. Maybe you have a part you're trying to install and you use brute force when you need to use finesse. Maybe you don't quite spend as much time as you should in your workshop manual and you do something incorrectly and break a part. Sometimes maybe you're doing a major operation and you get to the end of the process and realize that you have to do it all over again because you skipped a key step. Anything like that is, to my mind, a type of stupid tax. Everybody taking on a major restoration project pretty much is going to pay a stupid tax at some point or another. In my previous videos, I've already talked about some of my stupid taxes. The stupid taxes that I've paid have often come with doing something at the very end of the day when I'm tired and I'm not paying attention and I'm not thinking through what I'm supposed to be doing, and I end up screwing something up. Doesn't happen a ton, but it definitely happens, and I find myself referencing these types of screw ups more often than I would care to in my videos. So there's that. This particular episode is going to largely revolve around a type of stupid tax that I'm paying with regard to my GT6 engine. It's not a stupid tax from something that I broke, had to rebuy, or anything like that. It's really a stupid tax from not following the normal procedure and, not thinking through the process the way I should have, sort of getting things out of order. So that's the type of stupid tax that I'm about to discuss. So before I launch into the actual story, let me explain one basic fact, because I've watched a lot of car restoration projects on television, online. I've read a lot of accounts of car restoration projects in magazines and so forth and so on. So I know that one of the first steps in the process before starting a project, largely before purchasing a project, is you make sure that the engine turns over. From there, a lot of times one of the first steps is to make sure the engine runs, even if you have to rig up a number of sort of temporary things in order to make that happen, and testing the drivetrain. A lot of times people do all that before they will actually strip a car. That was not my process this time. So let me go back to the beginning. Summer of 2020, I got my GT6 and got it home. And as I've explained before, the circumstances were different. I wasn't buying a car from a stranger where I didn't know the history of the car. I knew the chain of custody of the car from the time my father purchased it off a lot, probably at the end of 1972, all the way to the time that I got the car from our cousin in the summer of 2020. So I knew that my dad bought the car in 72. The car had already been in a severe accident before my father bought it. While my father had it, someone in a parking lot ran into the driver's side door, and he had the Triumph dealership replace the driver's side door of the car. And then he sold it to our cousin in 1975. Our cousin drove it for a number of years, and I knew of a few dings that the car had been in during that time. And I knew the car had been off the road for quite some time, but I also knew that almost all of that time it was stored in a barn, out of the elements, and all of that. I also knew that if my cousin had been aware of any major issues with the car, he absolutely would have told me. So I really didn't have any major concerns when I got the car. When I got it home, knowing all of the history with accidents and things, the thing I really focused on was stripping the car to see how much work was going to be involved in getting the body back into the shape I wanted it to be in, as close to its original shape as possible. As you can see, if you watched my previous video, there's a lot of work to be done there. But even as we were bringing the car home, we stopped at a gas station, and I was just kind of looking over the car in a very cursory manner. But I noticed that there were splits in the inner wheel arches and distortions there that were going to have to be cleaned up. So I knew there was a lot of work ahead. So when I got the car home, I tore into it and really wanted to see about the body and all the work involved with that. And I did not spend a lot of time thinking about the drivetrain. I knew the drivetrain was complete. The only issue that I'd noticed right away is that the car did not seem to want to go into gear with the gear shift lever. I kind of assumed it had to do with the linkage or the selector mechanism somewhere in there. Subsequently, I've pulled the cover off the transmission, and everything inside the transmission looks really good for its age and the mileage on it. I can stick my hand in the transmission and get it to go into every gear. Um, Looks good, very rebuildable. Don't see any major issues with it, but I certainly noticed that it was not wanting to go into gear with the shift lever right away. At some point after I had started tearing down the car, after about 3 months, for whatever reason, I went ahead and removed the drive shaft or propeller shaft. And I don't even know why. It was probably just something that was fairly easy to do at the end of the day, and I was inching closer and closer to the time where I was going to pull the engine. So I just went ahead and pulled it, and at that point, I remember grabbing the flange on the differential and kind of messing with the differential a little bit to get a sense of its condition. For whatever reason, I didn't put any thought into the engine. Don't know why. I just didn't. So I got to the stage where I was about to pull the engine, and my father was helping me, and we had everything in order to pull the engine and transmission out of the frame together. And I looked at my father, and it sounded incredibly dumb as I was saying it, but I looked at my father and I said, we haven't ever turned this engine over. We looked at each other for a few seconds and went and grabbed a breaker bar and put it on the bolt on the pulley, the end of the crankshaft, and tried to turn it over and wouldn't budge. So as I said, we had everything ready to pull the engine, and so my dad looked at me and said, "Well, we'll get it turned over on the stand." We weren't overly concerned about it. It wasn't an engine that had in any way gotten water inside of it or anything like that. So we didn't worry about it much. We just went ahead and pulled the engine since we had everything ready, and we figured we'd get it turning over on the stand, which turned out to be a big mistake. So let me walk you through from the time we pulled the engine to where we are today. And, as with a lot of things, I wish that I had something more positive to report right now. But hopefully I will have something very positive to report a little further down the line. So here's a photo from the day I pulled the engine, shortly after the failed attempt to turn it over by hand, as I just described. And here is the engine on the stand. Actually, we pulled the engine in October or early November, as I recall, and my father kindly put the engine on the stand, side mounting it while I was at work during the week. Then eventually more components were stripped off. The engine was there on the stand with the spark plugs removed, and therefore the engine obviously should turn over easily, but it did not, so the engine was clearly seized. I soaked the cylinders at first with Marvel Mystery Oil. In fact, I soaked them for an extended period with Marvel Mystery Oil. And I later looked into the spark plug holes using a borescope camera, where I noted some scale, I noted some rust, which is obviously not ideal, but nothing that really looked too scary. I continued to soak with different things, including Croyle, but didn't get any movement. I finally decided the next step was to pull the cylinder head. It was my first time this deep into a Triumph engine, and I went on and disassembled the head. It cleaned up nicely. It appears to be in good shape. I don't see any cracks or anything like that, but obviously it needs some work, and we'll eventually see what a machine shop says about its overall health. The main point of pulling the head was to clean up the accessible parts of the bores before soaking them some more. And they cleaned up nicely, but based on what I knew and what I saw, it was pretty easy to assume that at least some of the piston rings are stuck in the bores. I subsequently investigated the bottom of the engine, checking under most of the main caps and some of the conrod caps. Those I could get off relatively easily. And everything there was fairly clean, nothing looking troubling or anything like that. I also pulled the timing chain cover, and with the tensioner off the chain, I was able to verify that the cam turns freely. All of this just seemed to confirm the likeliest scenario that the piston rings are corroded into the bores. So I soaked the bores some more, top and bottom. Eventually tried the acetone ATF mix that some people swear by. I also hammered on the piston top some with an aluminum cylinder. Still no movement, although the engine stand flexed a lot every time we tried to get halfway decent torque on the crank. My father and I tried almost everything we could think of, and a lot of ideas culled from message boards and videos without going too crazy on the engine, and all to no avail. The engine stubbornly refused to turn over. So I finally, recently, just put the engine back in the frame and hooked up the entire drivetrain. This is a new development. At this point, I've just done a little bit of putting the transmission in fourth gear and rocking the car to try to get the engine moving. There'll need to be some strategy involved because the stripped car is obviously quite light and the ancient tires are not very grippy. My most determined efforts so far have simply resulted in the rear wheels dragging. I'm currently doing another soak of the bores, and then I'll try again. The one common tactic I have not tried yet is a serious application of heat. That may be coming. I did recently get a hopeful sign about stubbornly stuck components. When I was getting everything ready to pull the engine, I discovered that the exhaust downpipe was fused to the manifold, and ultimately the downpipe was cut off for fast and easy removal. After a few early unsuccessful attempts to separate the two items through various methods, including applying heat with a propane torch, we don't have an oxyacetylene torch, so we used what we had on hand. But the items would not separate, and they were put off to the side as a low priority problem. It wasn't out of sight, out of mind. I would go over and soak the joint with penetrating fluid every 2 or 3 months, and every now and then, at the beginning or end of the day, I'd do some careful hammering or prying, but just would never move. But this week, at the end of a long day, I started working on it, and I finally got separation, and I was able to get the two items separated in about 10 minutes. Now, I know that the situation with the exhaust manifold and the cutoff downpipe is different from the engine. That only got periodic attention. The engine has gotten more focused attention over time, and so forth and so on. But I'm hoping to get a similar happy ending with the stuck engine. So that's what I have for now. And at this point, you have my full GT6 project summer work update. Part 1 on the bodywork, part 2 on the engine. I am not where I had hoped to be at the end of summer. It's very easy to get behind with these things, unfortunately. I've had a lot of things come up. Some of them have been great opportunities to spend time with family and friends that I didn't necessarily expect. And then, as usual, things happen in the project itself that have slowed me down. So, kind of is what it is. Certainly, I had hoped by this point to have the engine freed up, to have it oiled up and partially reassembled and set aside, prepared to go to a machine shop in the fall or the winter. And certainly by this point, I thought I would be further along with the body work. But I'm continuing to plug away at it, and I'm going to try to appreciate the progress that I've made as opposed to dwell on how far behind I am. All right, so at the time that I'm recording this, I do still have about a week and a half left of summer before the academic year starts to get crazy. So we'll see what kind of progress I can make during that time. Maybe I'll have, for example, a breakthrough with the engine. We'll see. I will provide an additional update in a future video. Speaking of which, as usual, I do have more content in the works. Been gathering materials and preparing for a couple of videos at this point. So I do hope to be back with another video soon. In the meantime, please take care, and thanks for watching.